for this knowledge webinar of Ashish Life Science. I'm Dr. Amardeep. I'm handling the marketing and technical of Ashish Life Science. So it's my pleasure to arrange these kind of webinars so that we all can, brush up our knowledge as well as have some current updates from the experts. For today's session, we have Dr. Henry with us from Zambia. He's a poultry consultant, and certainly he is dealing with majority of the animal species. He himself is a qualified veterinarian from the University of Zambia, Samora, Michael School of Veterinary Medicine. He has worked with multiple pharmaceutical companies and has been consulting to field veterinarians for last 11 years. He has consulted with and offered training to small scale as well as commercial farming establishment. He is consulting to many of the farms, especially the poultry farms in Zambia, and he is an autism awareness advocate also, and largely a student of life. So it's good to have Dr. Henry, who will be our today's presenter. So Dr. Henry, on behalf of Ashish Life Science, as well as the whole veterinary team who has joined over here, whether he's a farmer or whether they are, vet practitioners or from academics. So I welcome all of you on behalf of everyone. I welcome you for this webinar, and now it's on you.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just confirm with me before you leave if I'm audible enough.
Yeah, you're audible.
Thank you. All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. And today I hope to take you through the journey of understanding stress in poultry, as well as seeing what we can do about it. So my presentation has been outlined in this format. And as you can see on your screen, I have an introduction. That's mainly, we talk about what stress is there. And then we'll explain what we are trying to do with the chickens so that we're on the same page. And then we can, on our step 3, we can discuss sort of in-depth how stress happens, going on to signs with an example on heat stress, and then why we should actually care about stress. Why is it important? Then we will continue and then do a generalized discussion about how we manage stress with particular tips about how we can sort of make steps to prevent it before it happens, as well as what to do after it happens in order for us to prevent losses or to help our clients prevent their losses with relation to stress. So please stay with me to the end, and let's see how it goes. And if you have any questions, as earlier guided, you can probably send them into the question and answer chat, and Doctor will help relay them to me at some point. So for our introduction, stress is a very complex subject. The problem with stress, with its reference, is that stress can be the cause of the problem itself. In itself, stress can be a problem. The bird can be stressed, whether a broiler or a layer, or it can come as a result of something else which is primary. And so, in order to talk about stress, we must first think of primary stress as a result of something, and stress which is in itself going to lead into a problem. And that's the first part, but we can go on from there and realize that we actually cannot see stress. When we talk about stress, most of the times the farmer or the veterinarian when they tell you your birds are stressed, or when you notice your birds are stressed, you will observe the signs of stress or the results of stress. You cannot see stress directly and say this is stress that is in the birds, but you can see that the chickens are behaving like they are stressed, or they are having such and such because this is a result of the stress. And then in this presentation throughout, we'll use heat stress as an example. Firstly, because I'm in a tropical part of the world, and so I understand that very well and its impacts. But secondly, it is easier to understand heat stress because even humans can relate to it easily. But then we'll then use the understanding that we get from heat stress along with everything else. You'll have to allow me to share the screen again,
Yeah.
Doctor.
Just a sec. I guess there is some technical glitch. Just hold it on.
Understood. Should I wait or should I continue?
Yeah. Now, just a sec. Yeah, you can now, doctor. Just share.
All right, we'll do that now. In a moment. All right. You can see the screen, I suppose.
Yeah. Now this is visible.
Okay, thank you. All right. So heat stress will be our consistent example, but with explanations that will help us understand all forms of stress and how to mitigate all of them. A reminder first. So whether you are a vet or a chicken owner, you must remember that the plan at the end of the day, why we keep chickens, is, if we can agree, it's to make money out of it. Either we are making money by consulting, or we are making money by producing eggs or producing meat. So we're either producing meat from the broilers or eggs from the layers. And we must remember this throughout the presentation. That's what makes our discussion important, is that stress can affect how much money we make out of the birds, how much profit we make, and can lead to severe losses in poultry establishments. So to understand it becomes very vital and very important, because we are trying to make money out of the birds, and stress can interfere with that. Now, when we are doing our planning steps, we usually will choose a good breed. And if you look on the left side, the part of the breed will be, you have things about the breed. There will be feed requirement for the breed, which we will give. We will provide water, which is a requirement based on the breed. We'll have space requirements. We have management temperature requirements. And then we think, okay, we will get production out of them. We will hire personnel as management, and we will seek some technical support, and we'll be planning, okay, we'll get production out of our birds, whether it is meat or eggs. We might do a vaccination program and do vaccination monitoring in forms of ELISA and everything. And we'll be expecting, okay, now we've done our job and we're really going to get production. All the time, we are looking at the bright side. What we do not plan in step 4 most of the times is we do not plan the problems that we're going to have with the chickens. And in this presentation, one of the most consistent problems you always have in your chickens is stress. It doesn't go anywhere. So you must plan it. With reference to heat stress as an example in this case, as well as all other forms of stress, the human relatable context in which you can relate to stress is that stress is usually a feeling. You feel stressed. And this relates to the earlier point that you cannot feel or you cannot see stress. It is most of the times you feel stressed, whether it is heat related or any other form, which will come to the causes of stress. So stress can be caused by many things, but then you feel it. And we'll come to the details of why stress is felt as opposed to seen in this case. We have to realize that stress can be caused by several things. In birds, it can be caused by overcrowding. It can be caused by overfeeding. It can be caused by underfeeding. It can be caused by overheating. That's like heat stress. When the temperature in the poultry house is above 27 degrees Celsius, your layers are not comfortable anymore, and it starts to affect your production then. So then it can be caused by noise. Too much noise can cause stress. Light, very bright, too much light can cause stress. Very low light can cause stress. Disease can cause stress, but disease can also result from stress. So, and we will see later how stress causes disease and disease causes stress. So, movement, if you're moving your birds from a breeding house to a rearing house for layers, you stress the birds. When you're handling them during vaccine, or you're doing applying a spray vaccine, you could stress the birds. And in any case, stress has a common center in it, regardless of what causes it. And we can see that several things cause stress, but regardless of what causes it, there is always one center part, which is why is it all called stress? Because it could be caused by different things, but it is called stress, whether it's caused by disease, light, noise, overcrowding, anything else, it is still stress. So let's look at signs first before we come back to that. So signs of stress, for example, we use most of these outlined here, generalized, but also with specific things related to heat stress. When you have stress, you have increase in body temperature. You have increase in water intake, decrease in feed intake. Regardless of what's causing stress, a stressed bird will take less feed. It will move less. And a stressed bird will have physiological impairment, which in heat will present as problems with breathing, for instance, panting, open mouth breathing, wings will spread. The bird in any stress situation will have general weakness in the body, because stress then impairs the ability of the bird to use the food and things like that. The number of birds dying will increase, and the highlighted part of increased mortality is because this is a result of stress rather than anything else. And that's when most of the farmers will call the vet. That's when they will notice that now this is a problem, and that's when your birds are stressed. And increase in mortality is an example of loss of direct losses that you witness due to stress, apart from production losses, which we'll talk about in a moment. Why should we care? Now, we should care because what we are trying to do when we are rearing chickens is to use feed, which is usually less cost, to change it into eggs or meat. And the reason we are doing this, investing money into feed and management and everything else, and supplements, which we talk about later, is because the chicken is capable of converting this feed into meat or eggs. Now, in the event that we actually have stress, the feed conversion efficiency, the ability of the chicken to convert feed to meat or eggs, is affected by stress. The major thing that stress does to your bird is it keeps the bird alive for the beginning part of it, especially, and then it allows the bird to be inefficient and results into the bird being less productive, and that results into you having losses while you are spending, which is the worst kind of loss if you want to look at that. When you establish a poultry business, you must then realize as a farmer, and for vets, you must make sure that the farmers and consultants, you must make sure the farmer realizes this. If you are not maintaining the bird's ability, efficiency to convert feed, you are not in business anymore. The bird has to be seen as a conversion unit from feed to meat or feed to eggs. If this way of looking at the bird is not emphasized to the farmer, the farmer will have a very hard time understanding and later on intervening in the negative impacts of stress. because stress is one of those things that can go on causing problems that are subtle, and the farmer doesn't want to do anything about it because it doesn't realize how much losses it's having, and they'll keep managing the result of stress and forgetting to manage the cause of the stress. Now, just as an emphasis, when you have a stressed bed and still on YWK, the chicken productivity will reduce. So there will be a decrease in egg quantity, which most people care about for layer farmers. Decrease in egg quality. You will notice the egg shell quality most of the time is the one that is easy to notice. Very few people notice the changes in yolk color, which also changes, but then your egg shells will start becoming most of the times pale, off color, if they're meant to be brown eggs. And I'm aware that in certain parts of the world, eggs are white, but with the brown eggs, which I'm more familiar with working with, you start getting an off brown color. For every stressed bed, the egg color will change. For every stressed bed, the production will reduce. Whether it will be initially by a dozen trays, and then they will increase, the drop will continue. If you're running a hatchery, for example, the hatchability will reduce. The fertility of the hens themselves, of the cockerels, will also reduce when they're stressed. In broilers, the breast muscle yield will definitely diminish. The meat quality will be depreciated extremely. The protein value of the meat will be a lot less. The decrease in general body weight will result from stress as well. Now, earlier on, I pointed out there is a common center for stress. Now, one of the things that is very common in stress and happens in all forms of stress is that there is a hormone called corticosteroid, which is the one which generalizes the stress. Now, to explain more about how this works and how stress is supposed to be complicated, in the most simplistic way I could find, I prepared this slide for you. So what happens, let's say in heat stress, is that there is an increase in heat as a start. And as the chicken experiences the heat or any other form of stress trigger, which goes with the list we did, there will be a body physiological problem that can be noted. In case of heat, the body temperature rises. And then you have this generalized reaction, which regardless of what is causing the stress, the antioxidant capacity of the body will decrease. This is the ability of the elements in the body to break down, to mitigate oxidation, which then results directly and indirectly into poor functionality of the digestive system, and mainly, let's put it that way. And then the feed intake directly from the stress itself, and also from the result of the antioxidant capacity decreasing, the feed intake would reduce because the activity of the bed and the physiological functioning of the bed has started to already decline. With the feed reduction and intake and in utilization, because the intestines were damaged, you have the ability of the bed to break down the food that we said is our major part of business and feed conversion efficiency. The ability of the body to use those nutrients, the metabolism declines. After that, you go further, and now you have production starts getting affected. Growth performance. This is whether it's in pullet rearing or it's in broiler production in terms of meat and growth and grams per week or per day start reducing. Egg production directly reduces in layers, and the egg quality that I pointed out earlier, the shell quality, the protein quality inside the egg, the fertility, the hatchability. Then you get oxidative stress starting to now increase even more. And when oxidative stress increases, this now starts becoming, that's the point where you start getting a much weaker bed and starting to be incapable of even perhaps taking feed at all. Movement is reduced and all those other things. our mortality starts to increase at this point, and then we can point at our center, cortisol. Corticosteroid, as a stress hormone, also has a bigger negative effect on immunity suppression. Now, suppressing immunity is a kind of a big deal because this is where most of the impact of stress on disease starts to work around this whole big picture. And when I come back to stress and its results, we'll say something about immunity. So I want you to remember that the center still remains the hormone, which then makes everything a lot worse. But every part of this picture that is in front of you now has got a stage at which the bird's ability to convert feed into meat and into eggs is diminishing every minute, or as long as it remains stressed. The complex effects of stress, let's sort of dissect them one by one rather than into that complex picture. So first, I picked a few to just elaborate a bit more. Stress causes general loss in activity, which then leads to a reduced feed intake directly. Stress on its own can cause reduced feed intake. But because the bird is restless, regardless of what's causing stress, whether it's light, it's noise, it's heat, all birds that are stressed to be restless will be inactive, will be in a state of physiological imbalance, so their feed intake will drop. In case of heat stress, it even goes a step further, where the bird is physiologically trying to regulate the amount of heat produced from digestion of feed. So it would naturally, when it's hot, the bird will take less feed. Even as temperatures start rising by a few degrees above 27 degrees, the feed intake automatically drops. Stress causes poor digestion of the already reduced food that the bird is taking. And now the bird has already dropped feed intake, and then further effects of stress start now leading to the bird further now failing to now digest that feed and use it to grow or to produce eggs. And because of the poor or reduced enzyme activity, this becomes a lot worse because the antioxidant and effect that diminishes, and then the increase in oxidative stress reduces enzyme activity, and this is the enzymes are the ones that break the bigger particles in food into usable food that can be converted into meat and eggs. And with stress, all of this starts to shut down. Stress causes the release of the hormone corticosteroid in poultry. This leads to generalization of the condition. That means that now the feeling of stress very much comes from this. In every living thing that experiences stress, there is a hormone relation that makes the living thing, in the case of humans, feel stressed. And that is in whether the chickens feel the stress or do not is not my assertion at this point. My point is that regardless of where the small stress is coming from, whether it's from increased light or it's increased noise or it's from increased heat, regardless of where it's coming from, the whole body will be eventually affected because there is a hormone that makes the whole body get affected by it. And this is despite the idea that it will affect it generally already from not eating enough and other things. And this explains the result of stress on all systems, because now it will affect the whole physiological function of the bird. Reduced feed intake and poor metabolism of the feed, which we've just pointed out many times now, leads to poor growth and development, and directly leads to poor immunity, poor productivity, and losses directly from that, because we are waiting for the chicken to produce. Stress hormone leads to immune suppression and results and results into poor response to vaccination generally, and also makes the stressed bed more susceptible to infection. This slide is the one I refer to when I say that we need to understand that all forms of stress, because it leads to immune suppression, will either cause diseases that are like we have E. coli in most water, underground water, especially if you don't do farm testing for your water and everything else, you should probably consider that. But then if you have an excessive bacterial count on your farm, and you have a stressed bed, you will find that the bed is likely to get sick faster if it's stressed than when it's not, because the stress immune suppresses. If you're giving a vaccination against diseases, we have a lot of Newcastle or infectious bronchitis. If you're giving a vaccine and the bed is stressed, the immune system will not respond to the vaccine as expected or effectively, and then it will result in poor performance of the vaccine, of immune failure of immunization and protective levels of immunity. So the bed would be given the vaccine but not have immunity. So then when disease comes, it'll get sick anyway. So this is a very bad aspect of stress. When it starts generalizing and affects the immune system, it really hits us where it hits the most and makes us lose a lot more money in poultry enterprises. At this point, I would like to go into the, stress management. I'm assuming that at this point, we have actually generally understood the causes of stress and the complexity of stress and how it affects everything really, and how it can come from everything and affect everything and cause general losses in our enterprise. So if the chicken is sick, it will be stressed. If the chicken has a lot of noise, it will be stressed. The chicken has got anything that is a little off what would be its comfort zone, it will get stressed. We must remember that before we move on to try and start to manage, because then at this point is where people start frowning about why should we do this? Why should we not do that? Because if you don't exactly understand how much problems you're avoiding by managing stress, you will just overlook it and you will be just substandard on your percent production. And you'll be on and off, your mortality rate will be slightly higher, your production will be slightly lower, and everything will be just slightly off. Your number of damaged eggs will be slightly more, your number of differences in uniformity will be slightly off, your CVs will be slightly off, and you won't actually be managing to solve any of this if you don't look at stress, because stress is the all-time constant in all this poor performance of a bed, regardless of where it's coming from. So let's go to management. So in order for us to manage stress, we must first do what I have called a stress audit, which we do on most of the farms we attend to. It is a stress audit in order to identify the particular sources of stress in your region of the world, in your climatic condition and situation, in your
Doctor, we are not able to hear you. Dr. Henry. Sorry, guys, I guess there is some network issue. Soon Dr. Henry will be back. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, already I can find few of the questions are there already into the question and answer. So you also can continue adding your questions there. I guess there is some technical glitch with Dr. Henry. Soon he will rejoin and we will continue our session. Meanwhile, please write down your queries or any questions in the question and answer tab so that we can just discuss with Dr. Henry. Sorry for the inconvenience. Dr. Henry will join as early as possible. Yeah, Dr. Henry is trying to fix up his issue and he will be again back. Again, we are so sorry for the inconvenience caused. And Dr. Henry is back, so he will again will continue with the slide. Yeah,
I
Dr.
am
Henry, please.
terribly. Hello, please allow me to the video.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
terribly
it is
sorry
our.
about that. I have no idea what happened.
Yeah, yeah,
But
no issues.
yeah,
Dr. Henry,
okay,
you can share your screen now.
okay, there we are. Okay, so all right. I hope that was not long enough to lose your the flow. At the moment, we are back on here, and okay. So based on your farm situation and how you establish it, and they are always, you can't get a perfect environment, you can't get a perfect climate, you can't get a perfect house, so regardless, or you can't get a perfect bird, so regardless of your circumstance, you need to do now an evaluation of that to find out what are the risks that your particular farm faces. Then you set up a plan. This plan means it has to have a way of measuring those stress factors with reference to heat. You would have thermometers, you would have humidity loggers, you would have so temperature loggers, humidity, you would have some various aspects of your situation, including disease monitoring, for example, which would be disease pressure, which leads to stress, subclinical disease, for instance, that could lead to persistently existing stress. They are, if you're in a place which has got mycoplasma, for instance, mycoplasma is almost like a disease which persistent causes some subclinical pressure on the bed, which in a way can be consistent, looked at as consistent disease stress on the bed, depending upon the levels that you're dealing with. And you would have to manage that. So I would like at this point to realize that based on the source of the stress, you have different ways of looking at how you're going to manage your primary cause of the stress. So you have to identify those sources before you start managing the stress on its own, because you have to also sort out the cause of the stress. So you can manage the stress and you can remove the cause. Those are two steps of intervention. So we are going to talk about managing stress, but then we need to understand that managing stress, even when you do the best you can, you will still have consistent stresses. But then you have to do the stress audit to know where those will be coming from and how you make your plan, how you measure it, and how you monitor. You have to review specific stress events. The specific stress events would be the times when your production has started dropping, when your weights are a little bit off. So you then check what's happened here. Is it that, why did I, compared to my last batch of broilers, why is it that the uniformity has drastically changed here? What did I have? So you then say, okay, there was a lot of heavy rain and thunderstorms, or there was a lot of this, or the temperature rose to 45 or 35 ambient temperatures. And so because of that, on this particular, for this particular week, our weight gain was a bit less. What could we have done to mitigate it? So while you're doing your audit, you sort of use your audit results to get a plan. The smart thing to do would be to create a standard operating procedure around all stress events. Once you identify a stress event or a potential stress event, you create a plan for what you could do about it and what you will be doing about it as an emergency plan. This is because stress, as it is, based on that picture I showed you, goes in stages, but becomes more and more complex the longer you take to intervene. Which brings us to our next slide. You would have to know certain things to manage stress first. First, you must know those factors that are fixed. The fixed factors will be things like your bed type and what bed are you using to produce eggs? What bed breed are you using to as your broiler breed? There's some minor differences, but sometimes the minor differences can be significant when doing your audit, because then you know what the differences between what this bed requires and what that bed requires is. Stocking densities. Stocking densities can be age related. And if you are going to do movement of beds from one house to another, you must know when to move them correctly, when to move them, how to correctly move them to reduce the stress from movement, but you cannot eliminate the stress from movement. Regardless of how best you handle the beds when moving them, as long as you have some handling doing, there will be stress, but you have to do something to reduce it. So your stress audit makes you reduce the effect. And then when we are managing the stress later on, we can guarantee almost that what our intervention will be, will have better results, as opposed to if you just leave the stress to go on and we leave a high stocking density of beds per cage, where the manufacturer says, put 4 beds, we put 6, where the manufacturer says 9 beds, you put 20 beds, where your manure collection was supposed to be done every day. You do it once a week, and the ammonia increase and everything starts causing stress on the bed and ventilation problems, and then disease comes in. You have to particularly be concerned about how you're managing your ventilation in beds. Ventilation is a consistent worldwide problem, because regardless of where you are, the beds still need to breathe. So if your ventilation is very poorly managed, and ventilation, temperature, humidity will be your primary problems that will cause stress worldwide, because then those are primary needs for the beds. Second, after that comes food. And so your ventilation management, what kind of control do you have as primary controls for that? Is it automated? Is it even if it's an automatic system, is it properly maintained? Is it checked? How often is it checked? What do you check for? How do you check that when you were away, nothing went wrong. That's very important, because when you're around, especially for managers who are not on site every day, you come back to the farm and find that everything was not the way it was. So do you have temperature loggers, humidity loggers, airflow monitors, for example, anything that tells you what was happening when you were not there? And before we can get to the point where we have to rely on the bed to tell us, to notice those signs and use the signs to then do our management, because by the time you see the signs, it's a bit too late. There is already effects of stress. So install devices for this and check these things and see how they're working in a timely, standard way, in which you can actually ensure that the bed has got minimal stress. Expectations, feed and vitamins, because now I'm going to the part where we are managing stress by supplementation, but most farmers assume, and this is expected, that feed is has got the vitamins and everything the chicken needs, which of course in formulation it does. But then I need to point out in this slide that specifically there are certain vitamins like A, E, and C, which are very important. E is a very powerful antioxidant. That and A is important for intestinal integrity and blood vessel integrity. And these vitamins in dry food are not retained. They cannot, they get destroyed by oxidation most of the times, among other things. Heat destroys them. And any feed that you have that claims that it is dry and claims that it has vitamin A and E doesn't have it anymore, or it has been destroyed to a point that the bed won't even have sufficient enough of that vitamin to use. You must remember also that even if for the microelements and minerals that are in the feed, stress in most cases reduces activity of the bed, in all cases reduces activity of the bed and reduces feed intake. And almost all the time, the last thing that the bed has to stop drinking is water. So it will either in heat stress increase water intake, or in any case of any stress, maintain water intake even when the bed is off feed. This is why we have an added advantage as far as water-soluble supplements are over feed. If you're going to do management of stress, most of our management is based on the idea that the bed will continue to drink water a lot longer than it will feed when it is under stress. It will stop eating feed before it stops drinking water, or it will drink more water than it and stop feed completely when it is under stress. Timing for supplementation. So our intervention is supposed to be supplementation. Now, we will go to specific details of supplementation when I'm doing the summary, especially because, but the timing of the supplementation in a generalized version, this is like a general concept of what the times what even when you're blindsided, your audit of stress with your professional that you engage must include at least this. When chicks arrive, they will obviously be stressed because they are at this point, you must remember, they are going to be transported to your farm. In whatever conditions they're going to be transported, that will be stress. There is change of environment, there is temperature changes, there is feed type, which is changing because the chicken hasn't even eaten yet, by the way. So at this point, the bed will be stressed whether you like it or not. Regardless of what you do, they or chicks will always be stressed. So this is an intervention point. So before we say what to do, we must know when to do it correctly. Because if the timing is wrong, the result will be wrong. The effect of the product to be wrong that you choose to use. So at this point, when the temperature of the poultry house is above 27 degrees Celsius in your layers, for example, you know that this is an indicator to do something. But in order to do that, to know that, you must have means to measure. You can't thumbsuck the temperature. Before during or after moving birds or handling them in any way. This is most especially for layers. This is very effective when you, very important when you're doing injectable vaccines intramuscularly, subcutaneously. You are definitely stressing the beds there. You are definitely stressing the beds when you actually spray them with a vaccine. You are definitely stressing the beds when you withdraw water in order to ensure vaccine intake. You are definitely stressing the beds when you walk in with a fogger to spray them. You are definitely stressing the beds when you are flush cleaning the pipes during rearing. You are definitely stressing the beds when you remove the fawns to clean them and there's no water and they're walking around. So stress, as you can see, remains a consistent theme throughout your production. You can't hide from it. At vaccination, when you vaccinate the birds, even when you do it the best way you can, the vaccine itself, in trying to elicit an immune response, so challenge the immune system like a disease would and cause stress on the birds. And if that's not managed, the vaccine response will decline because birds will start going into the same state they would if they had been experiencing disease. Some birds even have very high temperatures post-vaccination, depending upon which strain of vaccine you're using. And that in itself is extremely stressful. During medication, when you medicate birds and they are trying to break down the medicine in their liver and excrete it and everything, they feel stressed. I'm using the term feel because I want to relate it to the way humans feel when they're taking most medication. There is this weight of taking medication that comes in you. That's because the body is working to break down medication and eliminate it from the system. So all treatments, especially antibiotic treatments in countries that are still using antibiotics, including ourselves, when you treat a bird, you are medicating it. When you're medicating it, the bird has to excrete that medication in order for the body to task its body systems towards that. It actually has a certain way on itself and some degree of stress that it experiences, which will have negative impact on productivity, growth, and everything else as earlier discussed. And all other times noted by your professional in your stress audit. So the stress audit should add to this list. This list is pretty standard. It will be on every poultry farm, and whether you like it or not, these will be stress events. And you have to do something to mitigate them. Before the bird responds to that stress, you must do something. Which brings us to here. What products do? So basically what products do when you are using them for stress mitigation is that the first thing that is important would be electrolytes. In whichever case, electrolytes play two roles. First, they are very important in what is called memory stabilization, which allows for energy to move into cells and make the chicken not to be weak. So restoration of strength and activity of the bird is dependent on restoration of electrolyte balance. This will be your sodium chloride and potassium to balance up how the body should function inside the chicken. Now, if you don't restore your electrolyte balance, then the bird will remain weaker. So it helps in strengthening the bird, among other things. If your stress cause leads to dehydration like heat, electrolytes will also help in rehydration directly. If we go to the right, we'll have vitamin A and E. Vitamin A and E is very important because it helps restoring intestinal functionality, and this makes the bird absorb better in terms of food. Vitamin E will help in restoration of blood vessel integrity along with A as well. And E works with selenium, which is a microelement. So you could vitamin E and selenium plus vitamin A will help in that repairing. Now, and if you look at vitamin B6, it will help in joint repairs. It will help, that's if they're damaged already. And then it will help in repairing damaged brain cells as well. A does a bit of that as well. If you look at lysine and methionine, when they're given, they'll help in making the cells and reestablishing or maintaining growth of cells. So when there's damage, and we caught the stress a little bit later, when there's oxidative stress and cellular damage starts and protein disintegration starts, the lysine and methionine will help in facilitating the rebuilding of that, together with the other amino acids that are in your feed. Now, you have to look out for products that have these things in them in order to use to manage stress. Now, there is something I want to point out that I find very important when we are talking about stress in this, is that at this point, we are targeting stress at two levels. One is before it happens as a preventive. The other one is restoration. Now, if you give at these points that we pointed out here, before as the chicks arrive, when temperatures are just above 27, but before the bed starts panting, when we are going to vaccinate tomorrow, so we start today. If we're going to move the chickens tomorrow, so we start today. When we're medication, so we start today. Beforehand, we actually, if we know this imminent probable stress event, we can then use these elements which are in products available to medicate the chickens, to give them the treatment before they actually experience that stress. Thus, then these will work to maintain productivity and not cause that loss that we've been singing about from the beginning of the presentation. So we mitigate stress, we prevent stress by giving these beforehand. And if we are a little late, we must then try and give them as soon as possible, as soon as we notice those signs of stress, which we discussed earlier. Take home message, and I hope I'm still within my time. We have to understand what we can use, because then as farmers, as vets, we need to know what our strengths are. So the strengths are that we can easily identify stress in the beds. We can identify it using the tools before it happens. We can identify it by the behavior of the beds when it starts. Reduced feed intake, reduced water intake, before mortality starts to increase, before mortality drops. If you have a system that monitors feed and water intake only, that would be good enough for you to realize, no, today feed intake has dropped. And if you are a proactive farmer, you act then. If you are a proactive vet, you recommend the stress mitigation then in anticipation. It's always cheaper to prevent it from before it starts dropping in production. So if you wait a couple of days to confirm that the feed consumption has dropped, by then you would have reduced the functionality of the beds for 3 days. You have to play catch up. That would be too late. So, and stress is preventable. That's our advantage, our strength. And then there are valuable products on the market that can be used to provide mitigation. And in our SOPs, we can put them as emergency responses. And then our opportunities is we can actually create routine interventions at the times that are very clearly outlined at chick arrival, at vaccination, and all that. We can create routine interventions that can mitigate non-stress events, which are universal worldwide. Plan ahead of season variations. That's an opportunity. You know, it's a rain season that's coming. We are in Zambia, we are just coming out of the rain season. And this one was very erratic. It had hot weather, it has humidity on days you didn't expect. Anyone who didn't have the measuring tool was really thrown left sideways. Center. But with predictions are accurate in your country, and if you can be told that the temperature tomorrow will be high, why not put an anti-stress before then? Something that mitigates stress before the stress event comes. We know we can help. That's an opportunity. One of our weaknesses, and probably one of our greatest ones, is that we have unqualified personnel that can't give us the information that feeds into our opportunities on the left side. So then we can't know when our events are coming. And there's people who we give instructions to do things and they don't get to do it. So a very fragile, unpredictable management system. We wait until it's too late to act. So we have a very passive responsiveness that then waits until production drops. And then we want to magically get a product that will give us results in 3 days or 5 days. By the time the chicken has a production drop, for instance, you will need another 10 days at least to reestablish an ovarian hierarchy. That will, so if your chicken drops production today, it already means that the ovarian hierarchy inside it has been disturbed. The yolks that are supposed to be ovulated, if you count them in the beds, have become less. So it means your production will be very hard to restore. It takes between 10 and 21 days, depending upon how late you are, to just get production back. You can't have a drop in production already and expect to put an anti-stress there and get it back to exactly what it was like the next day. It will still fluctuate a little, high today, low tomorrow, high today, low tomorrow, before it stabilizes again. That's why it's important to have a responsiveness that is not passive and that doesn't wait for the stress effect to show. There is then the other part, which is now the threats. When we delay, in this case, we have loss in production, which in broilers, you probably will never recover because your time frame is 6 weeks, 42 days, 35 days, depending upon when you're cropping between 35 and 42 days. You will find that you cannot get your weights back. You just have to forfeit the losses in that batch and improve in the next one. And that's where your stress audits are very important because you can have multiple cycles of broilers in the same house, are within the same season. So you can directly apply what you got out of your audit on your previous batch onto the next one. But if you don't know, you can't even think of what to do. Then there is losses in beds directly, which are in both broilers and layers. 100% recovery is never guaranteed, actually. So if you delay too long, there are sometimes that disease sets in and now you have to manage your vaccination, revaccinate, you have a lot of things that could creep in. The longer you wait to manage stress, the less likely you're going to get 100% recovery. And I just pointed out, like in broilers, it's like almost impossible to get any form of recovery from a stress episode. You just have to try and make sure you have minimal or stress and by managing points of potential stress. What we can do, and this is a summary of almost everything, we can identify prominent stresses, arrange them in order of persistence, because the stresses that you have consistent, mycoplasma is one example. You have it, it's not going anywhere. You can anticipate that by week 40, even when I vaccinate my beds, by week 40, the immunity will go down regardless of what I want. And so I would have to start intervening for that. If you are in a country that has load shedding, like South Africa and Zambia, for example, there's power cuts, you do backup generators, or you have, if your house is closed, what are your consistent problems? Is it going to be a season of heat? Is it going to be a season of consistent coldness? Because in cold stress, you have to maintain a higher energy in your feed. You can make feed adjustments to it. And because you're doing multiple vaccines every second week or every third week, what are you doing? And what is it that is causing consistent stress? Is noise. And so the beds will never adjust. Is it your feeders going and coming that is stressing your beds when you move them to your production house? So every time there is the feeder going, there's this rattling noise that makes the bed jump around and scream. Is it that? How long in those 2 months will you manage the stress that is causing before it causes a delay in peak of production, for example? Planning preventive measures. After you plan this, you identify the stresses, you plan preventive measures. You want to let everyone in management know the critical limits, the emergency interventions, pick the right products to manage and put those into your SOPs, use them for the right reason, at correct dosages, and for the right duration. Because I find a lot of people trying to cut down on use this for 5 days and they want to use it for 2 days. And their stress event lasted 1 week and they want the product to manage it or restore it in 2 days. That's short of seeking a miracle. I think we should consider how long we have exposed the birds to the stress, and that should be for the vet. They will tell you probably how long you need to mitigate it based on the repercussions and at what stage we have actually caught up with this problem and how long we need to do it. There are birds that we actually have consistently on anti-stress every day for a full month or a full 6 months because their stress events are consistent. Can't do anything about them. So we just work around the requirements of the bed every day and maintain them on that. But it is based on what your situation is and the profession, which brings us to the next point. The vet that you engage or the professional that you engage must have a full assessment done, do corrective measures which reduce or eliminate but not eliminate stress losses. We must be aware that regardless of what you do, you will always have some stress slipping through, and this will cause some losses in any case. Permanent changes on building structures and preparedness for seasons, fans, conditioners of the air, moisture regulators, everything else that can be permanently put into your building infrastructure, your cage designs, your stocking densities in the poultry should be pre-decided. Those which are structural adjustments, which are permanent. We must remember that feed is always inadequate. It always needs supplementation because there are vitamins that will just not be stable enough in feed. It's not possible. Before, during, and after exposure stress factors, preferably do something. Add vitamins. Give all the eminent stress. Combination of vitamins and electrolytes should always be considered because they work together. They can't work separately. And if you can have amino acids in there, that's also good. Consult a vet to design a preventive plan suitable for your farm against stress. And note, stress affects everything and it can result into every loss that you have. And at that point, thank you very much for your attention. And thank you for your time as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doctor, following the time guideline. And the most important is guiding us on the very important aspect that is the stress management. Certainly, it is, most of the times we neglect the fact that supplementation of vitamins as well as minerals are important, especially the electrolytes. So we at Ashish also always try to give one of the best products, which are of European as well as the GMP standards to the world. So we also have a unique product that is Stress Win, which addresses the stress. And thank you so much for your time for this one. So let's quickly go to the question and answers because a lot of questions I can see over here. So we can just go through. Hope, Doctor, you also can see some of the questions.
I would prefer if you walked me through them so I don't get lost in just answering and
Just click on the question and answer.
yes,
So,
I've looked at them. But I was assuming that you could go through them in so that okay. You want me to go through them one by one?
yeah, we can just have the one by one because there are a few questions that
So
Mr.
let's start at the top going down. How can we know whether our chickens are stressed or not? The major thing that I pointed out, monitor your water intake, feed intake. Increase in water intake, increase in feed intake as well can be stress in the cold stress situation. But most of the time, stress eventually leads to reduction in feed intake. So reduction in feed intake, increase in water intake are like very big red flags. The beds are restless, production drops, on your weekly measure of weights or any measure of productivity that drops without a very straightforward specific thing like an outbreak of disease, for example, will tell you that it's stress. And even when there's an outbreak of disease, you will know that the disease will come with its own stress factors. So monitoring production parameters and any drop in that will tell you that you are too late to monitor the stress. It is better to use equipment, temperature thermometers in brooder houses, because you can do overheating there and cause stress on the beds. You can underheat them and cause stress on the beds as well. So in that particular case, monitoring with devices is very important, and monitoring your parameters. I took longer on that one because it's very important to know how to know if your beds are stressed, and I thought I'd explained it adequately, but I've re-explained it just in case there's someone who missed it.
Yeah, Doctor, there is just a quick question that certainly because in the tropical countries, so there is lot of already heat is high, the temperature is high. So how, especially in the high temperature time, how one can have the reduce the negative effect of heat?
Okay, so that's something, like I said, we have been dealing a lot with now with erratic heat. So let's get, so there is the usual, which is air extraction fans, because you want to remove the hot air, which usually most poultries are not designed to have that opening at the center, which allows hot air to escape. So we put air extraction fans for that. We usually put a combination of air that's blowing, so fans that are blowing wind in, air in, and another fan which is extracting. Depending upon the size of the poultry, the wind direction, you have to figure out which side is best to put those. That's usual. Next thing that we do is we provide clean, fresh water as often as possible. So if your beds only drink 1,000 liters of water a day, and your pump is reliable, you cannot fill a 10,000 liter tank and put water for 5 days, for example, because the sun will heat it up and your water will be too hot for the bed for 5 days of the week or 10 days of the week. And again, there'll be a lot of bacteria accumulating in there. So providing fresh water and knowing how much your capacity of water intake is. 1,000 beds will take 250 liters of water a day. So there's no need to fill a 1,000 liter tank, which will last 4 days if you only have 1,000 beds. If you have 10,000 beds, you know that you'll be only using 2,500 liters of water. So we separate the reservoir tank from the tank which you're using for filling into the bed. So one is just a reservoir, and sometimes we have to risk losing water from the reservoir because it's too hot, so that it doesn't fill the main tank, and just directly fill the smaller tank, which can be used every day to keep fresh water going. We put ice in the water as well. When it is a cage system, we put our ice of potable water. We use potable water in containers, which we usually cut off, put in a deep freezer, and put it in the side tank on the cage line. So while the water is flowing, it keeps getting cool. If the water itself is taking we also use ice packs there, which don't mix with the water, those properly packed ones. We have put sprinklers on the roof before, for roofs that are not insulated, to cool the roof down. So when it's very hot, we cool the roof down, it drops the temperature of the house amazingly by at least 3 degrees. So if your temperature is at just going to about 30, you can do with sprinklers alone. What you do when using all of these things is that you have to measure how much your choices of what to do are lowering the temperature, how much effect you're getting. If your heat is making the chickens start hyperventilating, opening the mouth and breathing and panting, you want to then check and see that when you put ice in the water, how long before they stop breathing, opening their mouth and breathing. So then you can now create a routine for that. if you realize that your routine is still the same, but then they started again opening mouth breathing, then you put sprinklers on the roof. Remember, you have to balance these interventions with cost as well, because none of this is coming at no cost. But all of this must be done along with the vitamins and electrolytes, because those ones are controlling the effect of stress inside the bed, while everything we're doing on the outside are trying to reduce the amount of stress the bed is experiencing. But they're not taking it away completely, because most of the times you can't get to zero. So that's the few things I can point out with regards to heat that
That's
can
very
help.
perfectly said, Doctor. See, there are two aspects dealing with the heat that you are dealing. First thing is with the anti-stressors, which are the external factors which will reduce, and evenly again uh, connecting to the question that how we can reduce the heat or the negative impact of heat. See, few farmers I have seen that they prepare the dry grasses, they some curtains of dry grasses, and they just sprinkle the water over there. So that also evenly 2 to 3 degrees of the temperature also can be reduced by that. But the most important aspect is what stress has created inside, that the release of corticosteroid. So how that ill effect can be nullified is nothing but the supplementation of electrolyte, which take care about the reducing of the corticosteroid damage, and so that the animal's body or the bird's body automatically get calmed down, and the ill effect of heat can be reduced. I guess that's only the point which I wanted to add.
You reminded me of something when you said dry grass. We
Yeah.
also asked people to use, there's what are called Haitian sacks on the tank. So you put a cloth or something that will keep water on the outside of the tank and then as that evaporates, it leaves the tank water cool. It has worked really well, and the shade on top of the tank.
Evenly,
Those are
people they do it for their regular water, which they also drink for the human drinking, for the human
yes,
consumption.
absolutely.
So they also follow the same thing. I guess that also will be one of the important aspect to reduce down the stress. Okay, I guess Rajabu was happy with the presentation because I guess he was in a hurry. Anyways, there is one more question that do sugar reduce transportation of stress in chickens, especially?
We are on what should we?
Do
Okay, so
sugar
we
reduce
are on. I don't
Balcha?
know which question we are on.
Uh, Mr.
The
Balcha, from
question
top you
from.
can go to Mr. Balcha. 2:38 p.m. He asked one question.
Okay, okay, understood. It will be different. Okay, tell me the question and I'll give the answer. Not a
Do
problem.
sugar do sugar reduce transportation stress?
Oh, understood. Okay, so sugar is controversial. You see, the bed doesn't have enough saliva. The enzyme that is supposed to digest the sugar, the bed doesn't have it much. The amylase, it can only come from the pancreas, which in a young bed is not very functional. So it's the sugar that we have in the house is very poorly digested by the bed. But in the event that you don't have a choice, it is at least something to do. But most of the idea is that when you balance the electrolytes of the sugar in the sugar water that you are trying to give the bed is not very different from what you're trying to get the bed to eat in the food. So the sugar also needs to be aided by electrolytes for it to move and across into the cells after it has been digested. So if you're going to transport beds, you really have to work with a certain type of a sugar and which beds can use directly. And doctor, you can guide on, or if you have a particular
Yeah,
recommended
yeah,
sugar.
yeah.
Uh,
Certainly, when the question is related to the sugar, we all know sugar is again the energy source. But when we typically talk about the stress, there is no energy loss in the stress, or when we call it the debility kind of things. So that kind of activities are not there in these things. So certainly sugar plays important role, but I guess there is some kind of second opinion also to use sugar or not to use. But certainly, as we see that when we are already stressed, so certainly when we eat something sweet, it calms our mind. So that can be effect, but that might be a placebo effect. But when we talk about especially the stress on the birds, so rather than sugar, electrolytes plays very important role. This is what I have the point right now.
Okay, so we are, I didn't want to, because sugar is a controversial and conflicting topic, I
Yeah.
wanted us to be on the same page because sugar generally shouldn't work, but a lot of people try to feel that it helps more than there's no proof that it actually, if you give it, it will make a big difference. So basically, it's a feel. I always, my clients, I don't recommend sugar unless it's a feel good thing. So I never give sugar. That's why I was sounding distant to it. But I do know a lot of people that do give sugar, but it is not on my recommendation.
Certainly, doctor. I guess I'm on the same page. What you have recommended.
Okay.
Anyways, doctor, we got a very praise that thanks for organizing this webinar from Terry. Certainly, we will share our digital wing will share the slides with you. Evenly, this webinar also will be there on YouTube channel also, our YouTube channel of Ashish Life Science. So, and again, that will be the same answer for someone who is a anonymous attendee. The same things. How long? There is one more question that how long should we feed? Should feed be kept off to mitigate heat stress? I guess this question I didn't understand. How long
Okay, I think I understand it.
should the feed be
Usually
kept off?
as part of, so usually as part of management of heat stress, especially in broilers where you have beds flipping over, having ascites, one of the recommendations in the management process is to take away feed because broilers, unlike layers, can while they continue eating or aggressively, even sometimes in cases of heat, and then that increases the number of flipovers you get, the pulmonary hypertension. So what the recommendation usually is to start gapping the feeding. So you feed for 4 hours, you gap for 2 hours, or you rest them deliberately. You lift the feeders up. So usually in a 6 hour period, you offer 4 hours feed, 2 hours no feed, and that is usually what the practice. This is also related to breed standards on how many hours of darkness the bed should have, because some of the stress could be coming from too much lighting, because some people maintain 24-hour lighting in the broilers. So sometimes you can manage this with dark hours. Sometimes you can manage it by intermittent feeding. What you have to keep in mind, though, is that it's not so much of how many times you feed, is that your bed still needs to continue growing. So what you do is that your feed requirement per day is not changed. You're not feeding the chicken less, you're just feeding it less number of times. So you are, and in order to do that, your stocking density on the feeders must be in check. Because if you are feeding chicken, you're stocking more than most of the bale feeder types. The recommended manufacturer feeder stocking density is usually 75 or 50. Some even say 100 beds per feeder. But if you're going to lift up feeders, you don't expect 100 beds to have access to a feeder and drinker within the given 4 hours that you're doing that. So for clients that are recommending intermittent feeding, I also reduce the stocking density to as low as 25 beds per feeder, because 25 beds will have complete access to a feeder at each time. That means your stocking density in the poultry house also has to change. So this is where your audit starts becoming important, because you just can't pick up a recommendation to say feed for 4 hours and remove feed for 2 hours. Because if your stocking density on the feeder is at 75 beds per feeder, that will cause our problems in weight. So then that's why our approach mostly is, before we start adjusting on feeders and everything, we try and remove heat stress itself, reduce it with the measures we just pointed out now, and then we put anti-stress in the water, and then we move on now and electrolytes and vitamins, and then we try, and then, only then, do we then start adding, reducing the feeding, because that in itself can compromise the goal which we're trying to get for the bed to convert feed. We are trying to not interfere with that in the first place. But if you have to, you must then look into the stocking density on the feeder.
Yeah, and again, it will be important. I guess there is some echo. Hello?
Hello, we can hear you now.
Okay, fine. So I guess now this voice is quite clear. See what happens now. Sometimes when people just see that the person next to us or the farm next to us, or somebody has.
Doctor?
Can you hear me properly now?
Yes, can hear you properly now.
So what happens? People just see that see the farm next to me has followed the same thing, so let me follow the same thing again. So they also keep on continuing the same thing. But certainly, intermittent feeding as well as not giving the feed to the bird will be a cautious call, because not feeding also causes stress.
Yes, absolutely.
So that will be, totally by the consultant's call. Please visit or get advice of the poultry consultant. Doctor, can you just
Okay.
so there is one more question.
I don't know if you have seen it. There's one which is asking for measuring ammonia gas in the poultry.
Yeah, we will go less. We will go one by one.
Understood. Okay.
Okay. So there is one question that soft eggshell, whether that can be a consequence of the stress.
Okay, there is, yes, absolutely. Heat stress does cause soft eggshells, but it is not the only thing that causes soft eggshells. There's a few other things that cause that, including calcium deficiencies and other things. So when you have soft eggshells, which are along with a measurement of temperature that is above 27 degrees consistently, then you have to manage the heat stress first before you or while you are managing other things, because giving extra calcium can also cause a problem if there's already sufficient calcium. So regardless of what's causing the soft eggshells, if you have a heat problem, you must manage the heat problem first, because it's likely to lead to a lot more things. And soft eggshells are as a result of heat stress, yes.
Yeah, there is one question. That what will be the body temperature of a broiler grower if the external temperature reached to 30 degrees centigrade? Dr. Henry?
I'm here, sorry. You were saying if temperature reached 30 what?
30 degrees Celsius.
Okay, so that's very bad for broilers actually, and because actually what I usually tell the farmers, and this is a bit extreme, is try and have your temperature for broilers below 25 degrees Celsius. What happens with broilers is because they are growing very fast, their heart capability doesn't grow as fast